Donna Moala, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited.
So, what is conscious parenting?
Great question. So I have to preface it with that literally last night I finished my certification in it. So I've been using it at home with my family, which I'll talk about for the last 3 years, and it's changed our lives. So I've become certified in it. So I want to be very careful how I explain it because it's quite new. So the approach is that it emphasises being present, aware and empathetic to the needs and emotions of both parents and children, fostering and nurturing connected relationships. It's really important. It's a style, the style or the parenting style is authoritative. I get this, authoritative, which is
authoritative.
Not authoritative.
Yeah.
Can't even say it yet. Parenting that combines the warmth, connection, structure and boundaries. So we can go through the different types of parenting, but that is the biggest thing is that it's correction before connection. So we sort of my generation and before it was very traditional, very authoritarian, do as I say, and we were brought up like that, and I was a people pleaser, good kid, so it sort of was okay, but not really. I had to heal from that damage. But this kind of parenting is actually just being really more connected with your children rather than just do as I say. So basically hearing your kid, like from a very young age, hearing them and being involved rather than telling them what to do, allowing them to have their emotions because it's okay to have anger, it's okay to be upset. And as parents, we typically want to fix things or stop it. My kids are now 19, nearly 17 and 13. So I was a stay-at-home mum for 10 years and by choice, but it was still quite stressful. And I was a caring, nice, loving parent, but I hadn't figured out myself as a parent with all the triggers from my childhood. So what happens when we start parenting, we're adult, mostly adult, but then when things get a bit tough or things that we feel we're conditioned, like your kids need to be well behaved or they need to not yell and scream or throw things and stuff, whatever, then as you traditionally parent, like, discipline, yes, but a positive discipline. We never hit or anything. Well, I didn't hit. My husband might have given a smack or two back in the day, but you can't do that anymore, and nor should you. People are still doing it. But it's more about when your children are having emotions and feelings to actually connect rather than get triggered by them having tantrums and things like that. And as they get older, obviously, it gets a bit more complicated. But yes, connection before correction would be the best way to explain it. That we as parents, the conscious parenting isn't actually about the children at all. It's about the parents. Yeah. With no guilt or blame, but understanding why we react to certain things, and being able to stay connected with our children when things get tough.
How do we make parents understand that without almost
blaming them?
Yeah, because there is so much pressure on parents, especially single mums, to have a job, have a career and parent.
My gosh, yeah.
And then now it's like now I have to get coached how to parent.
Yeah, and I would hate for anyone to feel that way. Everything that I've ended up doing with my sleep and now the conscious parenting is truly from a lived experience, from really traumatic things that have happened. And we connected through 20 Talk. I think you told me my daughter and I had an interview talking about her mental health, and she was suicidal, and that was extremely traumatic. That was years of healing. And so mine's not this conscious parenting in the way that I want to sort of express it. It's not about guilt. It's not about making people have to be coached. If you are in a tricky situation and you feel like you're not coping, which happens a lot with parents, particularly single mums that are, doing it all, that being coached supports them. I know I'm sort of saying I'm sort of contradicting myself, but it's like coaching them to understand why they're feeling certain stress and letting things go. A lot of the conscious parenting stuff is letting a lot of the smaller things go and just, trying to be okay through the parenting, season.
Through your experience of parenting, has having a child acted like a mirror?
Oh my gosh. So that's really, you have done your research. It absolutely is. And I have three. I have three mirrors. And they typically say that the middle one is everything you could never be. And that is absolutely what's happened to myself. Like my eldest is very much like me in our personality, and just it is. And then our middle came out a little bit different. And she absolutely has a voice, absolutely has had a voice. And when she was younger, again, I was like, you can't have a tantrum like that. Or, you know, we used to sort of have these battles when she was like 2 because she had such a fierce, like, I don't want to do that. And now I understand, poor kid, but what I would do is like spend an hour trying to get her to do what I've asked, like calm down, like go in the naughty corner and stuff like that. And it just made it worse. So by the time she was a teenager, I did the best I could at the time, and this is what this is about with the knowledge that we've got. But now understanding is there's nothing wrong with her. Like she was a feisty little thing, and instead of trying to fix that, I should have just gone and sat with it and sat with her and let her go through those emotions. But what's happened is she is everything I could never be. And I remember last year quite a huge explosion on her side, which is totally fine. She was upset about something. And I'm using my new techniques, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But it's more about me trying to connect with her even through her challenging times. And when she had calmed down and we were talking afterwards, I said to her, you are everything that I could never be. And she was like, what? Like she just had a massive argument with me and yelling and screaming. But what I thought to myself is she's got a voice. I was never allowed to have a voice or talk about my emotions or not, if I didn't want to do something, just say no. So absolutely your children they'll show you everything that is sort of inside you, that they don't trigger you, but you have triggers that you need to figure out what those triggers are. Does that make sense?
Is that where the desire for you to quieten the voice of your thing come from? Because that was the model that you had learnt?
Absolutely. And I, interestingly enough, with a shared story, is my dad came from really bad trauma, like abuse, alcoholism, really extreme domestic violence. Dad was killed in a car accident when he was 15, of 7 kids. He had to leave school, like really trauma. And my mum came from a really lovely, kind, just really relaxed upbringing. So we had these two completely different generational, traumas or none. She had none. She was always so calm through everything, and my dad was not his fault, but understanding the different type of parenting. And so what happened is I was very much like my mum, and her generation of my nan and stuff are very strong, kind women. But when I got triggered, when the kids got into the toddlerhood or, as they were getting older and it was difficult, my triggers were the bad side, because what would happen, my dad didn't have that emotional regulation. And so that's what came out. And I knew that that's not what I wanted to do, but it wasn't who I felt I was. But those really blueprinted triggers when you're under stress, which what they call the ego mask, is just the I'm fine, everything's good. But then when things aren't good, then what's deep-seated inside of you will come out. So, yes, that's the reason why.
Well, just to bring it back to the start, with parenting, like what did you do to parent? Like was it, because there's no real textbook answer.
Definitely not.
So I'm curious as to like how I guess your evolution of parenting has changed since having your first child, second child, and through learning these things. How
did it happen?
Yeah.
I think everybody as a parent is on a similar journey, meaning, let's have a cute baby. Let's have a baby. Let's get married. Like that's the other thing. You're like, we'll get married. No one really talks about marriage, like really it's not easy. It's difficult. You change and work together or don't work together, but marriage is hard. And having babies is the same thing. So what they talk about for a woman is a word called matrescence. It's like adolescence, like a massive big change in someone's life. So when a woman literally becomes pregnant, they're already a different person. And when their child's earthside, well, you want to protect this little baby, and we don't know what we're doing at all. So you have what you feel like is natural instincts, but you just actually fly by the seat of your pants. And day by day, how am I feeling? For me, I've always been someone for the last 30-odd years to be the best version I can be. Haven't been that at all times, but if I'm not feeling good, I'll go to counselling, psychology. I've done it from 17. And so I've been that person to want to be the best I can, and that's probably been my biggest lead of trying to continue to be the best I can. But on reflection, that also caused sort of trouble in the home too, because I kind of wanted perfection. happy kids and not having tantrums and getting along. But that's not reality either. So it was really just sort of life-led and me wanting to try to get back to peace all the time, which is also not that easy. But then what happened when the oldest two got to teenage years, they suffered from really severe mental health. Again, I had underlying anxiety, ADD that wasn't diagnosed, but I was highly functioning on the outside. But on the inside, obviously I used to have, for myself, meltdowns and burnouts, but no one would know. I didn't know that I had anything that was diagnosable. But then what happens when you have children, you can't hide. It just comes out. And so the understanding that there's hereditary traits to that as well. And so then when my girls started to go through that, I had to learn. I had to learn what I'm going to do to help them get through that. And through all, again, the most difficult, dark times is a really good time to learn. And for me, I'm not frightened to share my stories. And because I have got a great platform on my good followings, sorry about that, on my Bub to Sleep, I get a lot of feedback from parents from that. So I know that people want to hear real stories and the whys and how to do it.
How did you find out that, I guess, the wounds that your parents, especially Dad, went through started to transfer to you and then onto your children?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Sadly, not soon enough, really. Again, not blaming not being diagnosed, because like I said, I was highly functioning with it, is the lack of regulation, emotional regulation, and just getting to the point of burnout, like trying to keep it all together and knowing innately when things would get tough and I react a certain way, it didn't feel good. So I had always known I don't want to say damage because it wasn't my dad's fault, but it was damage. From his traumatic childhood, I was already doing work on myself for what he had done to me before I had children. So I was aware of that, but it wasn't until they started to get into their teens where I was like, oh.
The high pressure moments.
Yeah, and hormones.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't, not talk about hormones, but it's like this horrific perfect storm of hormones, generational trauma and unhealed, triggers. And so I couldn't regulate. I would be able to have a lot of patience and I put up with a lot, but then with my not being able to regulate was really emotional, like crying and I know no one's perfect, but looking back, if I had understood those, I would have been doing a lot more self-help and kindness to myself to be able to regulate in those stressful situations.
So was there elements of perfectionism from you?
Yes, definitely.
Well, did you think your style was more, what sort of, I guess, parenting style?
I sort of fell into that. And again, you can look back and think, I wish I could have been that person. But I married a man who I'm still married to and love him dearly, but he has a lot of generational trauma as well. Again, it's not my story to tell, but it's all handed on in the way that he was brought up as well. So he was very traditional the way he was brought up, and that worked for him. He felt that it worked for him. He's a physio and he went to school, he did really well with everything, so he just thought naturally, let's do that. And so we sort of just got into the traditional parenting, which is, do as I say, really, or you're going to go to the naughty spot and stuff like that. And I didn't really, it worked for the first child, but working meaning she was just a really easygoing kid. So you'd say, can you do that? And she'd like, no worries. And then, but when the second child comes and gets into toddlerhood and there's a no, then that traditional parenting doesn't work. And so we were years of sort of that battle of trying to get this child to fit into our traditional parenting, conditioning and, all of those things. And it wasn't until it got to such an extreme point that I just said, we just can't parent like this. We just can't. And we got lots of family counselling to help us through that because it was so ingrained. Like, what do you mean she's doing that? Like, you're asking us to drop more boundaries and stuff like that when she's actually, feels like she's not failing, but doing things that as, parents you'd think's probably not the right thing, but basically the counsellors doing this sort of conscious parenting indirectly were saying, yeah, you just need to be more connected. And not that I wasn't, like I was around all the time and I feel like I was trying to be connected, but I wasn't fully emotionally connected to particularly my second child at the times when she needed me.
How do you help people realise that it isn't like weakness to have it figured out, even as a family unit? Because I feel like there could be like shame attached to it. Like, we're going to
shame.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, like, I was talking to my husband today about what I wanted to talk about and trying to get it across nice and clearly. And he's done so much training, so much changing. He has 3 daughters and he's had, like I said, 2 with really, really severe mental health. So he's really had to change and it's hard for him. And so I was explaining to him the difference between authoritative and authoritarian, and his blueprint's quite authoritarian, you know, or that's what he was, and he's trying to get to this place. But it's, if he wasn't married to me, I could typically see a man like that would just go, you know, I'm not changing. Like I think a lot of women, mums and dads are like, no, they've got to do what I say. So I think just by sharing stories and that we're all not perfect, and me being really real about it and how it actually saved our children and saved our family by changing traditional parenting, I hope that someone hears this and says, well, this is not working in our house, we need to change. That's the only thing. It's not the blame. It's like, this is not working.
Yeah. How
much do I love my kids that what is working, what isn't working needs to change. Get the help. Go to family counselling. I talk about that all the time. Like we did so many individual counselling sessions for years, and it just didn't progress until we did family counselling. So it's the dynamics of the whole family, and the children can see about our generational trauma. Like they ask so many fantastic questions, which is uncomfortable, particularly for men, because men are just like, I'm all right, it's not that bad. But really, it's why they get triggered. It's why we get triggered, is that deep-seated stuff that people don't want to think about. So I think if we can really understand that being parents is the most important role in a human's life, like for us to be able to support our kids enough that they have the soft landing to go out into the world. We don't have to treat them mean to keep, not, you know, like, what do they say? We've got to get them used to the world out there. It doesn't work like that. This conscious parenting is the other way. It's like if we can fill their buckets up, have the boundaries, be firm with that, then they go out with their buckets not overflowing emotionally and not being able to regulate going out into the world.
Were the main issues then that you had as a family come from a lack of connection? Yeah. Because you said you did the individual therapies, but I guess that only has limited value if you can't actually come back together.
Well, that's what happened, and I'm a fixer. Again, there's these 5 Fs, and everyone fits somewhere into it about what sort of personality trait you are. And so I wanted to fix. Not that it was wrong, that they were doing anything wrong, just it wasn't working. And it's just, I've got the question.
Being a fixer though,
yes.
Do you find it hard to look within? Like,
I did.
Yeah.
Not anymore now, because I'm someone who has done a lot of counselling and life coaching for myself to be a better person for my children. But it's really hard, and it's very hard for humans to actually acknowledge that it might be us. You know, really tough, because we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah.
As parents, we're, you know, and particularly in the life that we lead now, it's full of stress and anxieties and overwhelm, and, you know, it's very different than even 5 years ago. So put the pressure on parents for that too, and then, like you said, and now I've got to be coached as a parent, and it's like nothing to do with that. It's like, if you are really finding it hard, I have these tools that help you be okay through this stressful time, you know? And then in the long run it ends up making you feel like a better person, because, like, something I heard is shame doesn't like the light.
Shame only exists in the darkness.
Yeah. And I love that, because once you bring it out, and I've done, again, I wasn't someone that used to share stories like this, but now I'm not fearful of it or sharing stories, and it has absolutely got rid of my shame. No one can say anything to me I've released so much and talked about things that are shameful or things I didn't like about myself, that no one can really come back and say, well, they could if they wanted to, but, you know, like, before I used to hide it all the time. So if someone said, oh, you're so emotional or you have no emotional regulation, I would have been so offended. But now I'm like, yeah, I'm an emotional person and it's who I am, but I'm working really hard towards trying to regulate that, being aware. Yeah.
How's that personally changed you?
I feel like I am, so I'm 49, 50 this year. It's getting old. But I feel like I'm really close to getting back to my authentic self, like even better than my authentic self, like that real before you get into adulthood, because you're still getting parented, but I mean sort of back to my authentic self but not being parented by anyone. It feels like freedom. It feels like kind of heaven on earth, meaning do the best you can. And life is hard and things, everything I've been through, even at the worst time, I just kept saying to myself, this must be happening for a reason, because I believe in that everything's aligned. I'm very big into all the universe and stuff like that. And so, I believe everything's going to be okay. Even if it's not, I'm going to have to deal with it. But I feel really, really at peace with who I am.
All right, let's get into these parenting styles.
Let's.
So the parenting styles, there's 4 different ones and they're on 2 dimensions from demandingness and responsiveness. Yep. So let's start with authoritarian.
The thing is, again, everything that I ever talk about is not to make anyone feel bad. It's just to have that acknowledgement like, oh, okay, or I'm a fixer and a fighter and, okay, well, I need to be the best version of I can for my children, even 30% of the time, So, so authoritative. I can't say the word.
Authoritarian?
Yeah, no, authoritarian. Yes, sorry.
Authoritarian.
Okay, so I put it into dot points because you're going to get the gist anyway. So rigid rules with no expectation. Children must obey without question. So do as I say, and you might not be exactly all of them. You might be a mix of a few. And they value order and tradition over individual emotions or expression. And that's a really important one because a lot of people have been brought up in religions and come from other countries and stuff like that. So that's a really big thing. Berating their children for poor decisions. And children raised with the authoritarian parents as they get older often act fearful, associate obedience with love and success. So that's quite an interesting one. Display aggressive behaviour towards others, lower self-esteem and struggle with self-control. So, it's not a great one, but a lot of people fit into that with our generations, especially men, sort of in their 50s and stuff like that. Not all men, but they were brought up like that, like 100%. So they're finding it hard as parents to, why aren't my kids doing that,
The main feature that I found looking at that was the one-way mode of communication, which I thought was quite important. Like the kid has no say.
At all.
But do you think parents think it's working because they get short-term compliance? And
that's what my oldest daughter was. So I was my oldest daughter. So my mum was that really gentle, kind, no expectations, not in a negative way, but just a really, thank the Lord I had her. But my dad was 100% like this, but I never had a voice. And if I had a voice, I would have known about it, So, absolutely that. And also my husband, that's what he was brought up with too. So it was like we just did what we were told.
Yeah. I was thinking we could go through some different ages, so like 3, 10, 15.
Yep.
And sort of, I've got a few examples, few scenarios, and we can sort of, you can sort of give me the parent response.
Yeah, sure.
So we'll go through this for each parenting style as we progress. But so for the authoritarian one, so as a 3-year-old, so the child is playing with their toys and refuses to stop when it's time for dinner. Now, as an authoritarian parent, what would the response be?
Oh my gosh. That could be, it's like corporal punishment. It would be absolutely no space to let them stop playing or go and have that conversation or like give them 5 minutes going up to them. It's just like gets back to the do as I say. Absolutely get up. And that would probably be massive consequences pretty quickly and smacking.
And so then the child unconsciously learns that their feelings are
absolutely
unimportant.
Absolutely. Don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, over all these months of studying is that word safe. And I think, gosh, that's such an important word. But they just don't feel safe.
And it's conditional, isn't it? Like if I comply, then I'll have love. And there's that model of love then transfers into the adult life.
Yeah, people pleaser, all of the things that I was. And getting back to the that they value order and tradition. Oh, no, not that one. What I was saying about, can't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we'll go a little bit older, 10-year-old. So child brings home a report card with a bad grade.
Oh.
What's the response?
Oh, again, they would be consequences, and they would have known, and they would have been frightened. And I can share a story like that used to happen with me often because I had ADD, and I used to be so fearful of coming home. I remember one time I wouldn't come home.
Can you explain ADD as well?
Oh, sorry, attention deficit disorder. So again, it's quite the hype conversation at the moment, but I had it my whole life, but it's not something that was diagnosed. So attention deficit. So our brains are neurodiverse. So we are really awesome at specific things, but really don't like sitting at school reading books. So for me, it was always Donna's so lovely, but talks too much, And I just remember you just zone out. So I used to, really struggle. Not really struggle, but just not get good grades. But my dad expected good grades. And I was always just so fearful of, I wouldn't come home. And, he just, everything that if I wasn't perfect, I would get in trouble.
And that impacted your relationship
because,
lose connection, and there's probably a lot of reasons why kids get certain grades, but then they feel like they can't explain it to them because it's a one-way mode of communication. Right. So it's like it's outcome. Is it outcome based?
Absolutely, yeah. And the other thing is that parents that are in that state, and I was there with the traditional way, but it was more fear rather than want, is the fear of the what if. Like, what do you mean you're not going to pass school, or you're not going to, let's just drop all of that and just be connected with your child and see what they're good at and encourage them rather than you've got to get these grades. And for me, I couldn't get those grades. I couldn't get those grades. I was really good at piano. I did high-level piano and he was okay with that. But, it's perfection that cannot be achieved, and every child has different things that they excel at. And authoritarian parents just don't, they just want them to be perfect at everything.
Is there a massive reason why parents parent in that way? Is it often from their own generational?
Yeah. Any type of parenting is generational. It's actually not their fault. And I talk about my dad and that way, and we've done lots of counselling together, and I forgive and all of that stuff. But his is all generational trauma and fear. These sort of styles of parenting, particularly even helicopter parenting, there's all these new terms. It's all from love. My dad absolutely adored me, but it's out of fear. You've got to be perfect. You've got to do that. Otherwise, you're going to fail at life, And so all of these are all a little bit fear-based, except for authoritative.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, 15-year-old teenager comes home past curfew.
I never did it because I was too frightened. Yeah.
But
absolutely. Yeah. If I did, oh my gosh. Well, the thing is, usually, again, parents like that have no regulation with anger. It's so they're so triggered. So I would have just copped it.
Is anger a massive component of authoritarian because that spills out from a lack of emotional regulation?
Yeah, and again, it's the trigger. It's just a trigger. It's like the amygdala. It's like a fear. As soon as they fear that they haven't got control, they just lose it, and and then that's that little. You just go, oh, okay, then, because it's the fear based.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to highlight the impact that this is going to have over the kid long term for anyone listening, and potentially if you feel like you've been parented this way, why almost connect the dots a little bit for people. So I looked at a lot of research and I was really surprised at kids who were parented this way. You would think higher academic achievement, but lower academic achievement, less social competence, less emotional regulation, even though the parent's so involved, wanting so much.
Other way, opposite.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? And the thing is, for me, again, on reflection, I left home at 17. I couldn't wait to get out of there, and on reflection, that's why, because he had such control of me. But these days, kids can't shift out of home. No one can afford to really. So if you're in that situation and you're listening to this, it would be really hard. It would be really hard to try and find your authentic self and not get more and more depressed and down, being controlled like that.
And do you feel like people fall back into those habits and those traps if they're in that home?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's hard to get a fresh start.
You can't be yourself. Yeah. And you can't figure out who you are. And so it can be really dangerous because unless you can stand up to that person, which again, it took me up until my late 30s. You need a lot of support counselling wise to be able to stand up to a parent that does that. It's not going to be great for you.
So how can we get parents to break this cycle?
So if we talk about my dad, that cycle didn't start getting changed till my 30s, when I really started to understand the damage and that it was his issues and stuff like that. And it's like an explanation. One of the psychologists said it's an explanation, not an excuse. Because I always kind of excused his behaviour because of his trauma. But she's like, it's an explanation, not an excuse. And so that was in my sort of mid-30s. I was like, okay. And it's actually getting strength, however that's going to be, with other people that you trust, or another parent, or someone, counselling, to get the strength to be able to put the boundaries on. Because you're either going to have that person kind of disown you because they don't want to hear it, or they don't want to lose the relationship, so they'll do the work. But really it is understanding that that's what's happened and getting help to figure it out. That's the best way. You can't do it on your own.
What about people who would think that, oh, it's not for me, like, oh, it's not that bad? Because that would be a common thing. It's like, oh, I didn't go through that much trauma.
Sure. That was me. I'd go to the psychologist and tell them a story. I remember one lady had a tear, and she's like, and I'm like, oh, no, it's okay, because I was always like that. I was always like, things could be worse. It took years for me to really understand, and she's like, well, what you've just told me is really sad. And I was like, oh. So it was really not until my 30s, when I was getting that sort of counselling, that I had other people, because I wasn't talking about it to anyone. Like, I just was living with it, like, and so when you hear other people or professionals go, oh, that's actually really sad, it makes you go, oh. And so I think the biggest thing for that is how are you? Like, if you are okay, then fine, great. But if sometime in your life, in your 30s or 40s, you start to feel down about it, or not yourself, or it's affecting relationships, or I don't know if you've got children or not children, that's when you might think, I might look into that, because it's scary. Like, I know a lot of men that just don't want to talk about it, and I've tried because I'm a talker, and they're like, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So, yeah, it's really common, particularly for men, I think, which is sad.
But all these things are going to be unavoidable.
Yes, they are. It's going to come up somewhere. And usually that's by having children, you're forced to look at it. You're not even forced. Like, that's why divorce rate would be so high, I would say, because you've got, you get married, like I was saying, it's like happy days. And then really everybody I know, and of course I can talk about my own story, is as soon as you get pregnant, I'm not talking about sort of generations now, but I mean a lot that I hear and all the families I work with, your relationship changes. It doesn't have to be for the negative. You can grow together, but it's big. And then you come from different parents, and then you start wanting to parent certain ways, and you're either going to keep growing together or be in different books and go, that's not working.
Do you reckon it's because a lot of these conversations are very taboo, especially for men, which...
Very.
Yeah, okay.
And also men don't like failing. Like, I love men and, love my husband, but it's that ego. We've all got ego. There's no doubt about that. But men are stoic, and, like, even if that's not the way they've been brought up, it's just, I think, a biological thing. Men are the protectors and the providers, and we just go back to, biological stuff, and they just find it a bit harder. I think they definitely feel that it might be a sign of weakness.
I think it does have an evolutionary origin.
100% it does.
Because they wouldn't want to be perceived as weak for...
No, definitely not. And it's not, though. Like, and I say that to my husband all the time, strong, soft heart, strong mind. So basically you can still be really strong with your boundaries and stuff like that and be a man, but have a soft heart.
I had a friend who's a men's coach, Corey Watts, and he told me that emotional regulation's a masculine trait.
Oh, meaning?
Meaning that it's actually very masculine to be able to control your emotions, not be reactive.
Yeah, right.
So I found that very empowering to be able to control my emotions actually is signifying like masculinity, healthy masculinity.
Oh gosh, absolutely. And the thing is, I suppose, for me though, a lot of the men in my life, their dysregulation around that goes to anger. Yeah. I mean, that's probably not everybody's life. Hopefully lots of people have lots of nice, soft people that are men around their lives. But I have a lot of men that go to anger. And so it's hard for me to go, oh, is that a men's trait? Because that's kind of where they go to. I think,
he was saying that like men do that because they can control it. Like the anger, because they bring back control because they have the anger.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure relates to like parenting style.
Definitely. absolutely.
Yeah. What would a kid do, or a kid, like a young adult, if they're listening and they feel like they've been parented this way? What would you advise them to do?
Definitely get support from a coach, from a psychologist. There are so many different ways to get, even a life coach. You know, people go, what's a life coach? But it's literally understanding this stuff, because, again, bringing it to light, it doesn't have to be scary. It's just like, okay, that's why I'm feeling that way. Because once you've acknowledged it, it just seems to go away. If that not go away, but you just don't seem to be so upset about it once you've talked about it, understood it, and moved forward. Because everything that's happened, and again, talking to lots of different people, all the stuff that I had to process with my dad, I have, and it doesn't bother me anymore. Whereas, 10, 15 years ago, I was living and breathing being bothered by it, So getting the counselling for yourself, whatever that looks like, even if it's online, understanding it, not being frightened of it, and then, I think parents, hopefully, parenting is hard. And, my dad did honestly the best that he could, and, like I said, complete forgiveness, and he's in my life, everything's fine. But I think I can understand how people disown parents and rather just cut them out of their life, and feel like that might be the answer, and it could be, for sure, but does it really heal any of the pain of what's happened? So for me, I did lots of counselling with my dad as well, and I think a lot of men of that generation might not have done that or do that, but that's,
interesting.
You can't make people do it, but
but where's the line between cutting someone off because it was so traumatic and they were so abusive, and that's just not acceptable to like an understanding? But it's like, where is that?
I think it's everybody's personal line.
Yeah.
Again, with all the counselling I've got, I remember one the counsellors, psychologist went, so where's your level of tolerance? Like, where would be the cutoff? And I told her, and she's like, lots of people would have either left their husband or disowned their parent by now. So everyone has different levels, and it truly has to be your heart. You don't take advice from other people or anything like that. It's like, if that feels right, just do it. And the other thing that I heard before is just because it doesn't matter what title people are in your life, if it's blood or whatever, you have a right to not have them in your life, honestly. Like, so we're so, again, traditional about, it's family. We have to have them in our lives. No, you don't. You don't. And if we hadn't got to this point, my dad and I, really on reflection, I would have probably not had him in my life, which is sad to think. But I had my boundaries, and I think it's for people having their boundaries and working through it. That would be the biggest thing. In
modern relationships, do you think people don't do enough of that hard work?
Definitely.
Is it just to give up? Easier mentality.
Yeah, and again,
is it because they're so scared to go within? Because it's like, it's your fault, and there's like a lot of subconscious blame, and it's like,
absolutely.
And a lot of people leave relationships, and although it's probably joint problems, that their ego would probably generalize it as it was their fault.
Definitely. And I think I can only reflect on my marriage, and we've been married for 21 years, together for a long time. And we've definitely wanted to give up at times, individually, different times, and it's been really hard and at times. But the thing is, if you love someone, like still really love them, it really is work. It really is worth doing the work, because everything we've been through now, he's my biggest fan, and we know so much about each other, and it's again been up and down, but it's worth it. Weathering those storms, but again on the other side, if it's just not working, really, then you don't need to stay. But I definitely think, and I used to be that kind of person, to be honest. Like, before I had children and stuff, I would have left. I would have gone and lived overseas, and I was always that kind of person. It's not feeling great, I was off. So then once you have children and stuff, you're like, oh, okay, a bit more commitment there. So, yeah.
So it's, for a lot of people in the modern world, it's just easier to escape their own issues. And
yeah.
All right, let's get into authoritatives.
Right.
So this is meant to be more the ideal parenting style, where it's characterized here with high demandingness but also high responsiveness. So take us through that.
Okay, so again, this is what is the best way to explain conscious parenting. And conscious parenting is really as simple as that, being conscious, being aware, because we live our lives unconsciously, like what we eat in the morning, what we do, drive to work, did I even go through a traffic light? Like we quite live our life unconsciously, so it's being really conscious. So the best way to explain it is that they communicate openly about their expectations and rationale. I think that's really important, rather than saying you have to do that. So it's actually communicating that, giving children an opportunity to express their feelings, which is really important.
Two-way mode of communication.
Yeah, because the hardest thing over the last 4 years is being yelled at or like sworn at or whatever, and not taking offence to it, like actually just holding space. Because teenagers and kids, not until your sort of mid-20s is your frontal cortex actually fully developed. So we've got to remember that too. So letting them have those feelings, be it aggression, yelling and screaming, just be there. But they will not. So, however, they do not bend rules simply because their children disagree. So this is where people go, they're not getting disciplined. You have your boundaries, you have your morals, and you don't bend from that. So it's firm, loving boundaries and encourage independence, administer fair and consistent discipline. So there's still discipline, but it's fair. That's the best way to explain it.
All right, we can help highlight some of this. We'll go through the 3, 10, 15-year-old examples.
Okay, right.
So 3-year-old again, child's playing with toys and refuses to stop when it's time for dinner. What would an authoritative parent do?
So you'd stop what you're doing. Rather than come for dinner, and then you would go over to them. Typically, you need to touch them, like it's dinner time. I want to have, and go, okay, well, I'll help you pack up. Like you need to have those conversations of like, all right, or I'll give you 5 more minutes, but, hearing, because what the way you've got to explain to people is like if you were in the middle of doing something that you really loved and someone said, come to dinner now, want to get this finished, and you'd be upset about that. So it's like just giving them the space and time rather than rushing them is really important. But also, going over there and saying, okay, you've got 5 minutes, but this is what's got to happen. And stopping what you're doing is the most important thing too, and like hearing what they're going, like they could have tantrums and stuff like that, but you've got to have the boundaries. Okay, you can do 5 more minutes. I'll put a timer on, but this is what's got to happen. And
then the child unconsciously learns their feelings do matter. They can't have it all their way, but they're still considered. And
they've still got to come for dinner, and they've got the 5 minutes, and And what happens though, because people start to panic and think, well, what happens if they say no or they don't do the 5 minutes? And like then you deal with that, and it might take 20 minutes to get them to dinner, but then the next day when everything's a bit calmer, you go, okay, so before dinner, this is what's going to happen. So every time something happens like that, rather than sort of losing it and like, no, you've got to come for dinner now, process it, deal with it then. It might take a bit longer. Then the next day you have the conversation with the child, like, okay, you can do that, but at this time it's dinner time. So it's,
I feel like with people, when you go into conscious parenting, I'm sure there's some parents who start being even more perfectionist and thinking like, oh, if I do this, my child's going to end up like this.
Oh my gosh, fear. Absolutely. And so I've already done some counselling, like coached some people, and that was one of the biggest things is like we talk about life skills. Again, as a parent, getting our kids to do things, is it a life skill or is it an ego, like for a parent? So they definitely need to clean up, or they definitely need to have dinner, but you need to give them space to be able to learn how to do that, because kids don't want to clean up. Kids don't want to do what they're told. So it's like being patient through that process, because you go to 10 years down the track and they're just never going to come to dinner and they're never going to clean up their toys. But if you just consistently have those loving, firm boundaries, they will learn.
So consistency is a major thing.
Yeah. And give yourself time. We're all such time poor, and everyone has to work so much these days that it's like bang, 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 bang. It doesn't give the kids time to, transition. And so they just get more and more annoyed, particularly, poor parents that have been at school, at work all day. Their patience is like probably not much. Then they feel guilty because they haven't spent time with the kids. The kids know that, so it's just like a little bit of chaos every night, So it's starting to be aware of those cycles.
All right, 10-year-old child brings home a report card with a bad grade.
So again, in this type of parenting, you wouldn't really care about the report. No. So you would have the discussions of like why, but definitely no making them feel that they've done anything wrong, or because really it's all about encouragement with the kids. So it's a hard thing to get people to get their mind around, especially like, what do you mean? The grades need to be good, but it's really just not making it a big deal about it, or having that conversation. Depends on how old they are, being 10, having the conversations of what do you think about that? What do you think about that? What happened with that? And because they might say, well, I hate maths. and I do this and whatever. And so they might have got an A in phys ed, so you talk about that. So it's like it's got to be that baseline of encouragement.
How does that not lead the kid to be too soft? And
I know.
And you know what I mean?
So we've got to lead by example too. So and encouragement. So it's not like them to get away with it, but it's like leading by example, you know, like, and instead of like forcing them to do something, just more encouragement, like let's get this done and then we'll do 10 minutes of maths.
Okay.
So it's not giving up, but not being so harsh on that report.
So it's more process oriented rather than the outcome.
Yes. Reports shouldn't be, because you just said specifically about reports, it's a one thing, like it's a one-time thing that's like, is it a really big view of what they're good at? I don't know. So it's more like, okay, they're not doing that well at maths. Rather than saying anything to them about that, then you're going to work behind the scenes of helping them with the maths.
And what does the kids start learning? Like, if they fail the test, then like failing isn't like, I'm not going to lose
well, that's
love.
A bit of a natural, yes, definitely. But also failing's like a natural consequence. So it's not meaning at a pretty young age, you want them to understand that they've got to put the effort in to get what they need, but you also don't want them to feel like failures. Meaning they might be really good at English, but they need more support in maths. So as a parent, it's a lot of work from us, but we do that support to get them past the C or the D for the next, You're still doing all the support and encouragement and getting them to do it. You're not like, oh, you're not doing maths well, you're failing, well, just don't worry about it. It's still just doing a lot of extra work to encourage that they get better at maths rather than they've got a D.
Are more parents scared of their kids failing and getting Ds rather than having a gift and letting them pursue that?
Definitely. And, you know, everything that I've been through as a parent was all fear-based because our eldest had hearing issues and, so many things that happened when she was younger, and I just, so worried about it, speech therapy and all of this extra stuff. I'm not saying not to do that, but we're so fearful of them not getting into uni, like when they're in primary school. So it's like, instead of thinking of that, just encourage every year. How are they going emotionally? Children these days have much higher anxiety, so you've got to manage that a little bit. But it's not like, they don't want to go to school, we're not going to take them to school. It's like, we're going to get them to school. We're going to not be mamby-pamby about it, but you need to support them through their stressful times with that, because kids at a young age can start getting really stressed about school when they're not doing well at it, It's like what Einstein said about, you ask a fish to climb a tree, can never climb a tree, it thinks it's stupid its whole life, and that's so true. And I look at my 3 kids and they're all like amazing in so many different things and ADD, but I thought, they need to get these grades and stuff like that, but really what's happened is they excel at the things that they're really good at and they have to do the things that they're not. But that's life, isn't it? Still do your best, but it's hard to parent through when kids don't want to go to school or do stuff. You've still got to encourage them. It's not making them feel bad.
Yeah. Is it hard for parents to be present if they're fear-based because they're just thinking of the consequence for the future?
Yeah. And most of us are like that.
But it's from a place of love and care.
Always. All the parenting is really. Even the authoritarian is from a place, like my dad was all but fear-based, about the what-ifs and what I'm going to be like as an adult and stuff. So, it's all about that. Yep.
All right, 15-year-old teenager comes home past curfew. What's happening?
Oh, see, what would happen with that is, as a family, you would have had a meeting about this before. So as they get through to older years and you think, well, they need to have this, they're not allowed to this, they're not allowed to that. Boundaries. But have them clear before they go out, right? So you have a family meeting and you have a little bit of a contract and you just go, so you can go out and this is the curfew, but if this happens, it's your choice, then this is the consequence. So instead of just like, you're grounded forever and whatever, it just doesn't work anymore, is like actually having these conversations. So it actually ends up it's their decision to do the right or wrong thing, but they've got a consequence if they do it.
Where's their freedom and involvement though as well?
What do you mean by that?
In terms of like not... Because, like, is it just a parent setting, like, this is the exact time you can go out? Where does...
Well, you could also have that conversation too, which I have with my kids, is like what you think a fair time is.
Okay. So get them involved in that decision
the whole lot. Yeah.
Okay. So what is going to happen to the kid ideally? So if you parent a kid this way, what are sort of going to be the outcomes?
Well, I think, the whole thing of it is by staying. It's a whole thing about being connected. So if their foundations are a connected, heard child that can kind of regulate their emotions, hopefully, then they'll go into the world with those sort of standards for them. So things aren't so stressful, and they're going to fail, and they're not going to be able to pass this, and so it's more like a little bit like do your best. You have to work hard, still having all those things, but they're going to be much more balanced adults.
Yeah.
And I look again with the comparison for my mum and my dad is what my mum was brought up with is how she was as an adult. Much more sort of regulating with her, emotions and stuff like that. And encouraging, for them, it's encouraging independence as well.
Yeah. All right, let's head into permissive.
Mm-hmm.
So this is low demandingness and high responsiveness. So take us through permissive parenting.
So very loving, like I said, everyone's showing love in all different ways, but very loving, yet they provide very few guidelines and rules. These parents do not expect mature behaviour from their children and often seem more like a friend rather than a parental figure, and very few rules or expectations or demands. And so children raised by permissive parents tend to struggle with self-regulation and self-control.
Why do parents, because their responsiveness is there, but why is there such a lack of boundaries?
I think, again, it's fear. It's completely,
They won't like me?
Yes. Yeah. And I hear that so much. Like even someone I was coaching, and they had a 4-year-old, and they would only eat junk food. And I was like, okay, because obviously be careful how we sort of respond to that. And the parent, very loving, but she was explaining how she sort of got into that, and the child is fatigued because he's not eating, so she just rather give him that food. But what it comes back to is the fear is like, is the child going to like me? The child's going to have a tantrum. And it's like that's our purpose as parents, is to regulate the situation at all the different ages, but everything, and particularly that's fear. But kids actually thrive on secure, loving boundaries. Kids just go crazy and, again, can't regulate, don't have self-control if they've never been provided that support.
All right, let's look at the examples and sort of look at why the outcomes of these. So the 3-year-old child's playing with toys, refuses to stop when it's time for dinner. So it's pretty obvious.
They're just going to not care. Well, I would say, they just don't. They let them just keep playing, and they probably bring the dinner into where they are.
And then they're starting to just learn they can get away with what they want.
Absolutely, yeah. And kids, we've got to remember, it's even like when I work with babies, and I'm trying to have parents understand this, is children will always push up against boundaries, even when they're little, because they, again, let's talk about parents that breastfeed. And so children don't need to be breastfed all night, every hour, say. But there's wants and needs, so they want that all night, and the parents might give it, the mum might give the breastfeeding every hour. The child doesn't need it. So you put those really loving, nurturing boundaries, foundations, and 1 to 2 feeds, the baby naturally progresses to comfortably doing that. Whereas you're openly letting them do everything, they haven't got the capacity to understand what's good for them. So it's sort of like,
and I guess the 10-year-old, 15-year-old, so the 10-year-old report card with the bad grades, how would they react to that?
I don't even think they'd look at the report. And they could highly likely be the ones that would go to the school and say, I don't care. No boundaries.
Yeah.
Wanting the kid to be happy and okay.
Yeah. And 15-year-old teenager comes,
same thing.
Just hope, as long as they're safe and feeling okay.
Yep.
So the impact on the kid, so the kid's more likely to be egocentric, selfish,
yeah,
because they've always had their way.
Always, yeah. So there's been, and the thing is, like I said, you don't want to be hard on them to face the hard world, but it's like, how are they going to cope with boundaries and laws and regulations and going to work of any kind if they've never had them?
Are they quite impulsive and demanding?
Yeah, very. And again, very little emotional regulation.
How would you advise to coach parent kids like this?
So it's hard because it would come back to the parents understanding that that's what's happening. And again, it's no blame or fault. It's all through love, but it's getting them to understand how much better everybody thrives with some structure. Like, people don't like the word routine or structure, but we all work better our human minds work better with some structure and routine. So it would be trying to slowly implement some of that. And it would be harder to do that the older that they get, because the tantrums are going to be bigger and louder. And then parents are really scared of that, really scared of children having big emotions, and they want to stop it. And that's dangerous.
Big emotions.
Yelling, screaming, crying, again, talking about the bad food. So that what was happening with the toddler. So she just kept giving the bad food. But we all know, and she knows it's not good for health. But she didn't like the child crying and screaming.
How do these parenting styles impact relationship attachment styles?
You mean when
with anxious, avoidant?
Once they leave home and they've got
they get into
exactly how we've explained it as kids, exactly the same.
So their model of love is going to transfer.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
All of that just transfers into, and usually it's like, in a couple relationship, not just friends. Your friendships is different than actually in a loving relationship. But definitely what happens when you get comfortable, these inner dialogues and your sort of ego mask, like I was talking about, all starts to slip. And
I guess that's why relationships could also act like a mirror, because they could reflect like the way you were parented and raised.
Yeah. And you might look for that. It's quite often that what you had growing up, even if you didn't particularly like it, it's actually quite attractive.
Can you explain that?
So, someone who's like a people pleaser, who has grown up with quite a controlling or like narcissist or something, often will find a partner that has other really good traits. So it's not exactly like your husband, your dad or mum, but they're quite comfortable with those traits. Like someone that might be loud or it's a strange thing. You seem to get attracted to the things that you didn't like growing up.
So like you mean like opposites sort of attracting? Is that like a subconscious thing? Then
absolutely. Because if we were conscious about it, we'd I'm not doing that. But it might be some traits, not all of them. But it's what your body feels comfortable with. So if you grew up in a house that was loud and screaming and, and not in a bad way, it could be just a loud house, and then you were with someone in a quiet house, that would feel really uncomfortable. It would be a bit to adjust to.
So this is something I've understood is like the nervous system can get familiar in pain and in a this nervous system would rather be in a familiar pain than the uncertainty of calm.
And that again gets back to the ego, and the ego can be all different levels of things, but the ego doesn't want us to feel any different than what we know. So even if that's something that isn't great, and someone else sees that and thinks, well, I wouldn't like to be in that situation. If you've been in it your whole life, it's the comfortable thing. It's all you know. So it's really, again, having to go, do I like this? This is making me feel good. Do I feel stressed?
What helps people become more conscious of these things? Is it having someone like to talk to and
Definitely.
Make them realise that this isn't normal? Because I think a lot of people, especially when they're parented, they're young. Like that's all they know and understand.
I just think it when you're young, it's not as you have to worry about it. I think about when I was younger, I travelled, lived overseas, partied all the time, living life, had a great old time. And I knew that there were these things. I was always sort of working on them, but it wasn't massive. But what happens when you start to get older and don't party as much? I don't know. But, you're just not sort of keeping yourself busy with the fun stuff. That's when they can start rearing their heads a little bit.
Do you think a lot of people in this space I'm in are doing good early work on themselves?
Definitely.
Because I feel like maybe you can give a little promotion to people, because I know a lot of people who are like, not for me, but I feel like it's going to come to them eventually in their lives.
It will. And I like for you to reach out, and then I was, like I said, stalking you. I'm like, oh, I love it. And being, knowing the 20 Talk boys and stuff like that, just incredible men that you're young and interested in it, and it just comes from your heart. And sort of my generation of people, even women, are not even really starting to look at it. So I'm a little bit different. I mean, I've connected with people that are like me. But what I'm finding is absolutely your generation and being interested in it, it's just I love it. I love watching it. And I think, gosh, if I had that when I was my age, I would have been at this spot in my 30s, not in my late 40s. So then the damage on my kids would have been less. and I can't take anything back because I did the best I could and it was with lots of love. But if I had understood this work in my 20s, my gosh, crazy.
How has it felt personally being able to like connect the dots in your life? Like understand like the way I was raised is the way I raised my kids.
My gosh,
just
so
like
freeing.
just an understanding. It's like, oh, I'm not a bad person, but like this is just it makes sense.
I can't tell you. Like I said, it's a bit like heaven on earth. It's like and there's still lots of chaos in my life, but I just sort of go, oh, that's just life. But I feel so at ease. So at ease. And I also think, again, you know, I'm really lucky to have found my passion around sleep and now parenting and be able to do it as life, as my work. I don't even like calling it work, but it's so freeing because it's also made me who I am. My father, my relationships, the way I was, I'm just really proud. And I think that's the thing, is being proud and really loving who I am, whereas at times you just don't. I think everyone goes through those stages of like, you know, am I this or am I that, or did I speak to that person? You know, like you sort of second guess yourself a lot, where now I'm really confident that I do the best I can and not everyone's going to like me. And that was hard. And relationships change and that's okay, but it's really getting back, and it's so cliche, is really loving who you are and really connecting those dots and being okay with it.
Do you think the way kids are parented now has a big role in the fact that a lot of people struggle to be comfortable like in their authentic self?
Definitely. And what I've found, so I've been in the sort of sleep industry for nearly 8 years, and what I'm seeing in the last sort of 5 to 8 years is that parents are wanting the best for their children, but indirectly are causing so much stress. Too busy, too much going on, and so they're creating, and not meaning to because they love them, but they're creating these little children of exactly what they want. And so instead of letting them be the children, letting them be their authentic self and doing something a bit off track or, you know, not
making mistakes.
Yeah. What I'm seeing is parents just they're doing this, and they've got to do this, and they've got to get tutoring, and they've got to be doing Kumon when they're 5 years old. And how the kid's going to get to know themselves? They're not until they leave home, and maybe they won't. Yeah.
But they're only doing it for their own selfish reasons almost.
But they're doing the best they can.
They're trying to love the kid, but it's because of the way that they've things that they've learned themselves. And
also, you know, where we've all come from, you know, like people, we all want better for our children. And so that doesn't always work out in our narrative of like, you know, work hard, have the nice house, have the nice cars, go on holidays. And really now in reflection, it's like, okay, well, it's nice to have that, but it just comes back to connection and how quickly your children grow and letting them be themselves, you know.
Uninvolved parenting.
Yeah. This is a little bit sort of like, it can be all different levels, but it's basically little emotional involvement and they basically provide the basic needs of a home and food. They ignore their child when they're upset, expecting kids to look after themselves, not respecting their child's interests. They're very hands-off. They fail to provide adequate supervision, which is interesting. Children raised by uninvolved parents can be anxious due to the lack of family support, fear of being dependent on others, and increased risk of substance abuse, and exhibit delinquency during adolescence because they're just not being looked after.
Right, we'll quickly run through these examples. Yes. So the 3-year-old, the child's playing with toys, refuses to stop when it's time for dinner.
Yeah, I think it would be this a little bit like permissive, I suppose. It would be they just wouldn't care. They just bring them the food, or they don't even feed them.
The difference would be that they don't care about the emotions of the child.
No, or it would even be that they don't feed them. They've got to get their own food, even if at 3. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like that. Get yourself
fend for yourself mentality. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, 10-year-old, the child brings home a report card with a bad grade.
Wouldn't care.
Probably wouldn't even.
No.
Yeah.
Wouldn't care.
By that time, they probably wouldn't even show them because they would have learnt that they don't really care.
No, not even interested. No.
15-year-old teenager comes home past curfew.
Again, it'd be a bit like saying there that substance abuse is really big and delinquency. So the kids probably on the streets, out and about doing anything.
Do you reckon that's to try and find connection?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you know, and they would be feeling really lonely, you know, like, and also not loved. So that's the thing, is like, children aren't bad, you know, they're not. It's just that they are searching for things they're not getting at home, And that's kind of the worst situation of not being loved or looked after.
So then, the impact on the child is going to be go off, do their own thing.
Yep.
Is that just because they have
freedom?
Yeah.
Not in a good way. Yep.
Why do they search for it outside? Are they just trying to figure something out?
Well, I think teenage years is tough anyway, because you really don't know yourself, and it depends on what parenting you're getting. And, you know, again, having the girls and trying to be connected with them, they don't want to be connected. You know, like they're trying to figure themselves out. But I think it's like anything with parenting. If we didn't have those safe, nurturing boundaries, our kids would be vaping and drinking at home and having McDonald's every night, you know, like. So I think it's just the nature of kids to push boundaries or, you know, do whatever, and they're going to do risky behaviour because they're not cared about. So I think it's just that, not even really thought about too much, just getting up to mischief.
How hard is that balance to achieve, like of giving kids freedom and involvement, but like knowing like, okay, I'm the adult, I know more life experience. I know.
And you can't say that because they just tell you to F off. But and that's where it comes back to the authoritative.
Authoritative.
So I'll get it soon. It's having the conversations, because the thing is, and what I was going to explain too is, like, if you think about a little bit about conscious parenting, is that if you think about your life, and if you had a really crappy teacher that was really nasty, or whatever, I don't know if you had any, or you know, or a coach that was really abrasive and not very nice, and you can remember those feelings, like you felt unsafe. Did you really want to try? You would be frightened to go around that person. Or that you think of like a really nice teacher, and I know their names, and they were really sweet and nice and caring, but encouragement. So you want to do the best you can, and you think about that in any of your lives. Everyone's got those ideas. It's the same thing. It's just about parenting. It's about providing that support with love and guidance, and they want to earn your respect. Like, it's just a natural human behaviour. Like, if you can have the two-way conversations, then the kids are going to want to do the right things. And that's what I found with my girls, is like, at times I'm like, want to say, you know, I'm the parent, you know, but you just can't. But it's like, okay, this is what you need to do. I trust you. And then if something happens, then they've got to learn that there's natural consequences. So it really does work if you can stay connected.
Do you think that that's why, because it's like if it's not a two-way mode of communication, the child is learning like, oh, the parent doesn't really care about me subconsciously. Yeah. And then it's like, well, why would I make my behaviour because why would I care for the parent if they're not?
Yeah. And that can go two ways, because you've got the compliant child that wants to do anything to make your parent happy, and that's sad for the child because the parent can just control that child and they're just compliant. Or you've got another child who's exactly that, like, stuff you. You don't care, I'll go do whatever. And so it is getting just back to that connection, because innately we all want to be loved and liked. And so our kids are just small. They're just their brains aren't developed. So honestly, the more that you can allow that to happen, even in really difficult situations, you will find that your kids will end up wanting to do the right thing. And that's what's happened. I can see it. I can see it in our house. I can see it with other people. And you just give them the chance to do the right thing and be connected, and they'll end up doing it.
Do you think then connection's going to be massive for the kid, or for the relationship, but it just allows the open communication? So how important is that, like, open communication for the relationship? I know it's a pretty obvious thing, but like I feel like a lot of people don't understand that the role that communication and being able to actually have a say and say your feelings, and it to be a two-way street is for the development of both the parent and the kid. Yeah,
it's huge. But as parents, we tend to not allow that, because we're the parents. We're providing support. We're paying for everything. Like, we don't all go there, but like, there's that definite, I'm the dominant person. It just sort of naturally happens. But it's just, again, getting back to even when you're an adult, like, how much better you feel when someone lets you have their say. You say, and open, not an argument. It doesn't have to be an argument, but that someone hears you. You know, again, everybody wants that. Just being heard.
Why do you think so many young people struggle with mental health, and is it to do with
my gosh, that's another whole podcast.
Yeah, it is a whole podcast.
And like I've done a lot of research, and again, research because it's lived experience. 100%, it's access to stuff that their minds weren't ready for, and sadly, my eldest, and sort of we're that generation that's screwed up. It's not our fault. We didn't have enough information. We gave everything to our kids too young, and now it's a shit show. I can see already the government's just trying to pass something that B16 when you get TikTok and stuff. I think that'd be amazing, but that's never been talked about. So number one's that, 100% that. And again, this is no blame, but parents are just not around enough. So again, back in the day, back in the olden times, a mum used to be able to be there after school. And even if they don't want to talk to you, the kids don't want to talk to you, they're still in your space. And, I had this conversation with one of the girls a couple of weeks ago because, they'll come home from school and you go, how's your day? Oh, I don't even say, how's your day? Well, I kind of do. And they just grunt and because I don't like school. And I'm like, okay, get it. And they go into their rooms or whatever. And I've had to really get adjusted to that because I was like, have a cup of tea or have some food. But I had to be not offended by that. And so it's just understanding that, it's just not going to be easy to be able to. You've just got to stay connected even when they're not connected, basically. And so trying to be there, but asking them, "Do you like me being around?" And she went, "Yeah, why?" Because I was feeling like maybe I could do work after school because I always have worked my business, so I could be home for them, and they're getting not wanting to be around me. But now it's again with all this sort of study, that's normal. Teenagers want their independence even in the house, and so that's why I asked the question like, would you care if I'm here? And that's quite like, why would you ask that? But they just like that you're in the house. So I think again this is very old school, but it's just going back to the basics is like trying to be available if they need, and so what's happening is parents have to work so much, but then the children are on things that we don't know about. Even no matter how much we try and protect them, they're seeing stuff that they don't need to see, and that's a big disconnection. And then you've got the dopamine addiction, which we all are a bit addicted to our phones. So I think they're the main things.
It's another whole podcast.
Yes, it is. So is.
Donna, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a great chat.
Yeah, it's been really interesting.
It's been good to get your insights. We'll have to get you back to talk through. There's plenty more to talk about.
So much to talk about.
But thanks for your time.
Thanks for sharing. Bye.